Hi, everyone. Again, thank you so very much for joining us in this incredible space that has been ongoing now for, I think, nearly 3 years. For those who are joining us for the first time, I would like to introduce this space, the conversations, again, that I initiated together with Erica, as really a place to come together in all our differences. We like to call it an experimental space beyond institutional, geographical, and disciplinary boundaries to experiment with decolonial and decentral ways of knowledge creation and sharing regarding body fashioning. It's kind of like our decolonial response to the academic conference that initiated this incredible group of people in 2012. In this space, we like to be guided by Rolando Vasquez and his advice that he gave to us, that in conversation, engagement becomes key in the transformation from a position of consumption to a position of taking responsibility, from a position of indifference to a position of engagement, indifference with others, from a place of compassion where we allow ourselves to be touched and transformed by the other. This year, we kind of like rethought our format a little bit, where rather than having a different topic every month, we decided to try and see if we can reflect on the same topic every month, but by a different community. And so for this year, we've chosen to focus on the tensions between design and craft. And we formulated 4 questions that are very wide to be interpreted as moderators from different communities like or feel comfortable with. And so for this month, we're incredibly grateful and excited to have an Indian community to share their incredible insights and experiences with these tensions between craft and design. And so I can't put in words how excited and incredibly honored I am to be welcoming Richa Sood into this space as our guest moderator for this month. I met Richa about a year ago when we traveled to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan with an initiative called the Responsible Fashion Series. And immediately I was drawn by her wisdom and her insights as we traveled through all these amazing places that, of course, were very unfamiliar to us. But yet, I think Richa managed to communicate through design language and again, had these incredible insights. And so after the series, I reached out to see if we could co-author a piece together on these tensions, that what happens, what is responsibility actually when we meet in difference, but also when we meet in difference across the colonial difference. What responsibilities do we have as foreigners visiting Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, exchanging experiences and knowledges with local designers and local craftspeople? I'll just let Richa speak for herself. She did an amazing job, I think, with inviting 3 guests from her network, from her community, to share, again, their knowledge and wisdom with us. So again, thank you so much, Richa, for accepting this invitation.
A very warm good afternoon from India to all of you. Thank you, Angela, for really offering this platform. And I'm really thankful and really honored to have all the 3 speakers here. Thank you so very much, Soumya, Sachin, and Anas, for being here. I'm Richa Sood. I'm a trained fashion designer. Well, I graduated from NIFT, but in my heart, I think I'm still an artist. I'm a trained classical dancer and a Hindustani classical singer. And I don't know where I really crossed my roads with fashion, and I think it was more to do with textiles and embroideries and all the joy you can have with colors and dyes and surfaces. That's what attracted me to fashion. So I've been in the fashion, really the fast fashion industry, if I may say, for last 23 years. And it's only been about 4 years since I've been in fashion academics at Indian Institute of Art and Design. And I must say that it has really opened so many parameters, so many questions in my mind as a fashion practitioner. And it has really enriched me as to really negotiating where I am and what is fashion and where it stops and where art begins and what is craft. And I really give all this credit to my teachers and my professors and all these lovely people that I have met, and they are here to share their experiences with us today. I welcome you all on Conversations on Craft, and we will be really touching upon some very interesting perspectives when it comes to viewing craft through the lens of pedagogy and what are the challenges through design practice and how it is experienced through living with communities and really working with the experience of craft. It's really about um covering this sort of a proxemics that we have with craft, and we view it with a very distinct, in a very distanced way, and how about really entering their space and their living experience and what is being really lost in this process. So I really welcome all of you once again to this wonderful exchange of ideas that we are going to have here. And I would like to begin with introducing our speakers, Professor Soumya Pandey. Uh, she is a designer and educator and a textile revivalist, but she is an artist at heart. And for her, textiles is like her paintbrush. And the most beautiful part about her is the way she strings this into design education. And she also has a very sound experience into really embedding the understanding of craft and communities and how she holds this together with the students. This is something most exquisite about her, and we all will know once she starts sharing her experiences. And she's also currently working on the book on Kheta, which is an undocumented embroidered embroidered quilts of the Shershabadi women from Kishanganj. And she's also completing her research documentation around the weaving practices of Devang community in Kutampalli. And what really brings uniqueness in her perspective is the way she's strongly rooted in her Indian identity. So thank you, Soumya ma'am. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for introducing in such beautiful words. Yeah, and yeah.
And I would also now like to introduce Sachin. And I think it's really fortunate to have met him during the Denim project at the Indian Institute of Art and Design. And I think for me also, as a practicing designer who has been in the couture industry and fashion weeks, but the way he brings in the softer aspects of craft, the softer aspects of making, and the relation, the humanness and the emotiveness that he brings through his conversations, which are very much enriched by his own experience and his own way of sort of dealing and working with communities. So I really welcome Sachin here, and he has a very interesting perspective, being an exhibition designer, an archivist. Sachin does call himself as a hoarder, but he is an archivist, and he really has magical things that he has to really share with us today. Sachin also very delicately weaves in together material culture with the essence and the Indianness and the Indian ethos. And his speciality is the way he brings this forward as a story to this, which is very much relatable to all age groups, from first year design students to even senior researchers. So thank you, Sachin. Thank you for being here and welcome aboard.
Thank you, Richa. When you say so many things, I really feel stressed and burdened. I hope I'm able to sort of keep up with the expectations, but I'll try my best.
And yes, I would also like to invite and welcome Anas. We are so very proud. Anas he's graduated with his BA honors in fashion design from Indian Institute of Art and Design, and it's an absolute honor to have him here. And Anas is, I think, someone who brings in a very interesting combination of how he experienced his learning in the institute and how that has impacted himself, how it has impacted him as a human being and as a design practitioner. It has really changed the way he would look at craft practices and craft communities, and he has been able to bridge the challenges of being in a saturated designers zone and bridging it with practicing a craft and trying to keep it alive. So, welcome Anas, and he has started. He's the founder. He's a textile artist and founder of the clothing brand 23 Degree North, 69 Degree East. Anas, I hope I said it right. And yes, we all can make out because the name of his brand is very, very unique indeed. So it just definitely brings in the perspective he had while naming his brand. And so, yeah, welcome, Manas. Welcome on board.
Hello, thank you so much. Again, my
Hi.
hands sweating,
And
so
having said this, I would really like to share one more thing. That when we have these conversations, I think it's really important to acknowledge these kind of platforms. And I think one of these platforms has been really is we see at Indian Institute of Art and Design, where the vision and sort of the crux in our approach to design pedagogy is adding meaning to making. And design is not just a tool for beautification, but it is really something to engage with. So at our institute, throughout our projects, and this is where my experience and my engagement also enriched, when we really encourage students to get into the skill of making and working with hands, and the importance of handwork and hand skills. So I'm just sharing a few images here, where something like a craft project that we really take pride in. And I would ask Soumya to really elaborate on this, because she is really the brainchild who formulated this entire approach to embedding design learning through the lane of craft. So we look at students visiting um, craft clusters instead of just hearing about them in the studio. And so just here are a few images. So this was a craft documentation that was also led by Professor Soumya Pandey. And so these are our fashion design students, where we really look at changing the learning spaces and bring in the dynamics, changing the dynamics of the spaces to bring in active learning. So if you see, like in these images, we have students who have gone into those villages. They are communicating with the local crafts communities. They're staying with them. They're eating the food that they eat. They are sitting on the floor that they sit on. They are really viewing the textiles and what they make from the eyes of the makers. And here in our institute, the students really try to sort of bring back and share their lived experiences with the rest of the student community. So this is also very interesting aspect, which also Sachin brings into our institute, is where students are engaging with cotton hand spinning and really understanding uh, a cloth from the stage of a fiber and its intersection. But these kind of practices, if I may say, also inculcates a sense of community learning. It's not just peer learning; it's also bringing, connecting uh, each other through what we spin, through where we sit, to how we sit, to the conversations that we have, which is a very sort of an intangible but a very strong aspect for deep learning. So here also, when we have say projects like denim project, of course it with the denim we always associate with an industrial practice and a hardcore sort of an industry. But bringing in these softer aspects where students are participating and they're traveling and then they're participating in workshops, they're learning how about natural indigo, its historicity, its characters, what it enables and what it disables, and really getting a hands-on experience about the color, जिसे हम कहते हैं भी जब वो रंग चढ़ता है तो वो कैसा लगता है. So, and these are some of the swatches and explorations that the students tried during their workshop. And very interestingly, it was so motivating for us and so heartwarming that students wanted to come back and they learned how to make an indigo bat and they wanted to share it with the audience during our annual end term exhibition. So I think that's why platforms, especially education platforms and platforms like these, are really essential and so enriching for these conversations to come together. Having said that, I think now I would like Professor Soumya Pandey to take over, and where I would really like her to elaborate on um, what is the meaning, and do you think there is really the depth of combining these the understanding of craft and community, and how do you embed this in a fashion curriculum in an urban space?
I think the ease of being in this conversation is really got to do with that the fact that all of us have collaborated together and put out projects at Indian Institute of Art and Design, which we've really found as meaningful dialogues, not just as design educators, but as people who also see ourselves as designers who would like to contribute in an authentic way, get into a more sort of inclusive ways of dealing with students. So I think we're talking about design, which has its own pace. We are talking about design academics. We're talking about craft practices coming into the classroom. We're talking about the pace of academics, and we're also talking about the pace of craft traditions, especially in India, where it has a completely different language and vocabulary from various parts of the world. So if we try and really, I think one of the strongest reflections that I've had while putting some of the projects together related to craft at Indian Institute of Art and Design has been to acknowledge that one has to bring together design, academics, and craft as a pace that is sort of coherent for all the three areas. I think typically what we've done is we've allowed the research and documentation of the teaching, the teaching people, the faculty, to inform the class. And of course, for that to happen, one had to initiate dialogues, even maybe 2 or 3 years before it could be brought into the class. So if we understand that research and documentation holds such projects together, then one has to also understand that when you are dealing with craftspeople, you're dealing with living traditions, you're dealing with things that have hundreds and thousands years of continuity, as Anas would also talk about. We definitely need to understand that it cannot be done in one academic cycle. You cannot initiate a project in one session and implement it, bring it to the class. So, for example, what the work that we did with Kheta, the reversible quilts that are done by the Sheshabadi community in eastern part of the country. The research was initiated in 2017. A lot more people got involved. It was taken to IIAD. It was taken across departments. We brought in more expertise, more viewpoints, and then we, opened it up as a dialogue that led to a exhibition at Crafts Museum. So what I feel is that that sort of pace, that sort of time needs to be given for students to really be informed in the class. I think, of course, when we bring in craft traditions, an access to the community is required. Thankfully, we still have practices that are community led, and you can still go into rural parts of the country and witness it as being useful in everyday life, not a curated experience. So just bringing that together as saying that these smaller ecosystems that exist are sacred. If the students really understand that, and then they kind of, become observers, learn to observe sensitively, I think there is a certain, shift that is initiated. A lot of things I feel happen very slowly. The first time around, when the students go, into these spaces, it's quite overwhelming. But I've seen that, the students who have been touched upon, what they've witnessed, have always sort of, come back to the thing. So I think understanding that the smaller ecosystems are relevant, and we don't have to get into the mindset of fastening everything. It has to be seen as something that has its own pace of unfolding, right? So I feel that is something that we need to bring in. As design educators, I feel that if we are getting very obsessed with the idea of, deadlines and deliverables as specified, I think that's something we can all think about, and probably leave some of these ideas a bit more open-ended, less defined, a little more organic, because that's where, these three areas are sort of coming together. We're very fortunate as Indians that we can still, go back to these smaller ecosystems that I'm talking about in its regionality, in its complexity, which are extremely regional. I just recently concluded the primary research with in a village in southern part of the country in Kerala. And what I realized was that it was really a small village, 200-year-old village, like continued tradition of hand weaving. You can still see houses that are 200 years old. You can still see the traditional, dwellings of the weavers. You can still see pit looms and all of that. but it is still it has been kept alive because it's relevant regionally, you know. So smaller ecosystems that kind of find their relevance in keeping the regionality intact is something that we need to bring to the class, talk about it. As fashion teachers, learners, everything, we're so obsessed with the idea of saying, okay, what was the inspiration, where did it all start from? You talk about seasons, you talk about forecasting, you talk about completely different points that when you go into the craft area, they just don't seem to have any standing. So I think a very wishful idea has been that if we can bring in a different vocabulary to the class. Can we really talk about understanding influences and inspiration from the point of view of migration? Can we understand clothing, fashion as identity? Can we understand inclusiveness and living practices as connectedness through community practices? I mean, are those sort of shift really things that we can bring in the class? If we understand that everything, clothing or textiles, everything that we are talking about has a completely different empathy, it has a completely different emotional intelligence of things. That's something I feel that we need to do very strongly, be aware of it, so that that conversation is like a life changing conversation. Would anybody else like to add to that?
I think with this bringing these this sort of a conversation on fashion, which is very away from a very Western centric point of view. And
Yeah.
as a researcher, and as a pedagogue, when you bring this to the class, and you're coming in with a very long term sort of research, you've been persistently working on it, so you are perceiving it very differently. But I think I would really now want probably Anas to come in and maybe share his perspective as a student who's receiving it, and also how do you think this conversation in class really impacted your thinking and informed you as a design practitioner.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to begin with showing you my work to give you a better understanding of what I do. So we basically hand paint our textiles using natural dyes, which are available with the artisans. And as as you know, I work with the artisans of Ajrakpur in Gujarat. These are the block print community people, and they have been practicing this art for the last 400 years, even after the. Uh, so I've been using their spaces and using their dyes to try and do something different with the craft they are already doing. And I just used the natural dyes to hand paint my textiles and later combine it with the block print techniques which are already present there in the community. I also try to use their traditional motifs and place them differently, using different techniques and the different blocks, combining different blocks on a fabric. This is a new series which I started using a GoPro, where I put it on my head and then try to block print to give the viewers a perfect view of the textile.
Hmm.
These are the end results of what I do. After the processing takes place, after the washing and the dyeing of the fabric, these are the outcomes that I receive from the artisans. These are all 100% natural dyes. I just use their blocks and their dyes and try to do something different out of the traditional block print techniques. This is where I try to combine hand paint techniques plus block print techniques uh, to engage a younger audience, younger Indian audience to the craft. So I've been trying to do things differently just so we could engage more younger audience or more audience to the craft where they find art not so boring and maybe they could find something interesting and come more towards the Indian crafts and techniques and try to explore more of Indian crafts. These are the final outcomes of what I make. Yeah, so I would like to begin with telling you guys about the opportunities or the danger of opportunities of so-called collaborations between the artisans and the designers. Having experienced it firsthand, being with the artisans, living with the artisans, and also living as a student, I've been working with the artisans for the last 5 years now. So I have seen various sides of the craft from the designer's point of view and from the artisan's point of view. Experiencing things firsthand, I can fairly say that nothing is more dangerous than a collaboration between a big organization and an artisan. While because there are still people who are trying to do good for the artisans, but there are also people where they just try to take the profits out of the artisan organizations and then just earn big profits out of it. So I've also seen many craft organizations where they try to take credits out of the individuals, where, uh, for example, someone from the industry had tried to come and work with the organizations and tried to revive the craft. In return, they won't try to give credits to the person, but rather they take credits off him and then earn brownie points. So I don't think there is I don't think that there is one side that's bad or the another side that's good, but both the sides take share amount of uh, equal amount of what you can say. Uh, I think everyone is trying to just take profits out of each other's pocket in this industry.
Anas, I think,
Whereas,
you've very strongly explored your own identity as a designer, as a young designer, and you've also understood the identity of the craftspeople that you're engaging with. Yeah. So, as a fashion person, would you like to, reflect with us how you understand uh, the dynamics of identity
yeah,
here.
actually, so the first time I visited there was with my college mates, and we were there for our denim project where we first encountered these artisans. And later on, I also went there for my industrial internship for 4 months, where I lived with those artisans and I used to sleep in their workshops. I used to eat with them, talk with them a lot. That's when I realized that there's a lot of misconceptions that we have about the artisans and a lot of things. Actually, we think that the artisans know less and the designers know a lot more than them. But when we visit and when we stay with those artisans, we realize that Actually, the artisans are the ones who are making these designers famous rather than the designers making those artisans famous. So while I was interning there, I also realized that a lot of people from all around the world were coming to work with those artisans and block printers, and everyone was just trying to make new designs out of it. They would just hand over their designs to the artisans, and then the artisans would print those samples for them. But no one was trying to come stay with the artisans and learn from the artisans. And actually no one was able to change the system, or you can say experiment with the designs, because no one knew how to break the rules or how to uh, work with the dyes. So that's when I realized that there was a need to work differently with these dyes, as there are a lot of possibilities with this craft. And while I was interning with these artisans, I learned about how to make the natural dyes, what is the process that goes behind printing a fabric. uh, and I started printing my own fabrics during the working hours in the workshops. That's when I also realized that as a student, I was getting bored of the same monotonous technique that was a monotonous technique they was going around in the village. So I started practicing. I started printing my own fabrics, and I started to combine it with paint brushes and using their own natural dyes to paint the textiles and combining with block print techniques. That's when I realized that I should develop my own style of printing fabrics, because a lot of other designers are already printing same traditional textiles. So yeah, this is what I thought while I was working with those artisans.
Yeah, Anas, thank you. And I just have one question. I think that a lot of audience would have. So, in your practice, when you're working with Ajrak, block
Hmm.
printing, how are you as a young youth, like a young designer, who is very much in the contemporary space, and how are you negotiating with what is relevant and combining it with the traditional practice of block printing, without being sort of insensitive to its ethos?
So I realized that the whole process takes a lot of time and working. I mean, a lot of process goes behind in making of a textile. But in today's time, while everything is so fast paced, we are wanting to get everything in a blink of an eye's time. Like, we don't want to wait, we just want to order our fabrics and get them in a week's time. So I realized that there are a lot of misconceptions about those things, where people aren't able to learn about what is going behind the scenes in the textiles, and they just want to I don't know, they just want to exploit the thing. Where while when I was working there, I realized that there are a lot of people that are involved in making of a textile. So from a person who will wash the fabric, to a person who will print the fabric, and then again someone will dye a fabric, and then again someone will wash a fabric. So there are around 5 to 6 people involved in making of fabric. So this is what I mean. People are not willing to go through the whole process and not visiting the cluster, and they're not able to understand the whole process, which has to go behind the fabric to keep it traditional. While, for example, if we talk about Ajrak block print, an Ajrak block print fabric needs to go around for 21 processes, and it takes around 7 to 8 days to make an Ajrak block print fabric. Uh, but now people aren't wanting to invest so much time into it, and so are the artisans. They don't want to invest so much time and not get the returns out of it. So people are trying to make it more commercial, whereas the traditional aspect is almost gone. And therefore, when I go and work with these artisans, I just try to use the traditional blocks and traditional Ajrak block prints and combine it with new techniques just to keep the traditionality of the block print alive, and to show the young audience, the audience similar to my age group, that the crafts are interesting and one could really experiment with these crafts and make something new out of it.
Really exploring on this paradigm of time, I think that also was what Soumya mentioned and what Anas is also mentioning, and really about honoring the process. So I think I would like to invite Sachin to really share his views and his narratives on how what is the meaning and concept of the time in craft practices or communities or in the craft paradigm.
Before I talk about it, Richa, Anas, I had a question. Since you talked about honoring the traditional vocabulary of the craft context and having a consideration for it in the work that you're doing, um, can you briefly elaborate on why is it that you think it's necessary to honor it?
I mean, if someone is going to a particular village for a craft to explore a craft, they should know the traditional aspect of the craft, as in what is the process and what are the things that make that craft famous. Right now, what's happening there is everyone just comes over with their own set of designs. They give it to the artisans, and artisans will make it for them. There's no traditional aspect left to the craft now. It's really it. Now, when we talk about Ajrak block print, there are only 5 to 6 traditional designs that belongs to those traditional craft. And the craft is also mostly derived, the designs for the craft are mostly derived from the Islamic architecture and architectures around the world where you cannot make human figures or animal figures. So these are the things that one needs to take care of while practicing this craft or working with these craftsmen. But right now, what's happening is people forget about these things and they try to bring new designs to it, whereas they are not respecting the culture and traditionality of the
I
thing.
understand. My question was since you are emphasizing on the importance of this consideration, I just wanted to know if you have any thoughts on why do you think it's important? Why do you think that it's important to adhere to a large palette of traditional vocabulary in creating something for the present times? Do you have any thoughts on it? Because you seem to be very sort of concerned with it, and you seem to be giving it a consideration in your work.
Yeah, because I think the essence of the craft is really important. If the essence of the craft disappears, then it won't take a lot of time for the craft to disappear as well. Because in present day, the present generation of those craftsmen are not willing to learn the craft. So it's important for us designers to get into those fields and preserve the traditional aspect of those crafts while working with the same kind of traditional palettes, traditional motifs that were used in the early times or have been used in the traditional clothing that they have been producing for a large amount of time for the tribal communities as well. So I think in the present time, as we go forward in time, and as the young generation gets older, their present generation gets older, they are more interested in building a more contemporary form of block print, whereas they are forgetting about the traditional aspect of their own craft, and they are forgetting that if the traditional aspect of their craft disappears, then I think the craft would lose its essence, and it would just be another craft for everyone.
Sure, makes sense. I I think a lot of these questions that you are raising and you are experiencing, I assure you that even after 24, 25 years of practice, and I think Richa and Soumya would agree with me, our challenges and our questions still remain the same and fairly unanswered. And in my contemplations, I I realized that one of the reasons why these questions persist to uh, to be confronted by us and to bother us if we have a certain degree of empathy is rooted in the fact that most of us are actually outsiders who are wanting to engage with a context that is not theirs to begin with. Having said that, I think there is nothing wrong about it. But what it means is that we need to find those missing links by the virtue of which our existence with something that we are not a part of primarily becomes much more harmonious. So, so much like you, in my practice, owing to these impending questions to which I could not find answers, I had set forth on a journey to find a pool of know-how and knowledge by which I could reduce this deficit, this gap of dovetailing with a certain context. And while I was trying to seek answers to these questions in the contemporary context, constructs, theories, and outlook, I often found myself constantly hitting a dead end there. And I realized that the traditional Indian knowledge system actually throws light on this dilemma, on these missing links, because it is imperative that we need knowledge to engage with something that we don't understand. But then it also defines that knowledge actually has three stages in which it evolves. And it is only when you reach the third stage of a relationship with knowledge that you are able to unlock a certain kind of joy and a certain kind of celebration with whatever you are trying to engage with. So they say that there are three stages to knowing. So there is rather to knowledge based relationship, there is knowing, and then there is understanding, and then there is imbibing. तो किसी भी चीज को जानना, समझना और धारण करना, ये तीन अलग अलग अवस्थाएं हैं. These are three different stages in which you engage with something. It's like you and I, if we decide to live together, I may know you, but I may not understand you. And through that knowledge, there is only a certain kind of unlocking of celebration, joy, beauty, and bliss that will happen in our togetherness. Over a period of time, when I start to understand you, more layers of celebration, joy, beauty, and bliss, or CJBB as I call it, start unlocking in our lives. But it's only when we truly imbibe each other, then even without you saying something, I'm able to reciprocate your state of being. That is a state of imbibing here. And I personally feel that the greatest joys of life actually come only when we reach this third stage of being. So I was very fortunate to be touched upon several beholders of traditional knowledge, wisdom. Most of them were storytellers and bards in their own rights, but they were philosophers par lance. And I think what I found through them was this entire universe of unlocking this CJBB, which our contemporary constructs could not unlock for me. So the last 2 decades, my larger work, my informal research has actually been in collating these constructs, these definitions, and these principles that are governing every aspect of making, doing, and being in the Indian context. So some of these constructs are what I have collated today to share with all of you, and I'm hoping that hopefully they will help us find. Or at least they will throw a better light on the unique paths that each one of us are wanting to charter for us. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so as I said, these three stages of knowledge-based engagement are very important for us to be cognizant of. And I think even in the pedagogical framework thereby, we should be aware what is it that we are facilitating for a group of students in a given time. Understand that it's not possible to get into marriage from day one. You have to begin by dating and then formalize it into some sort of a courtship, and then if sort of stars fall in place, we may get into a marriage. But I think if this curve, this progression is known, then at least we will engage in qualitative dating. So even in our pedagogical framework, I think our course content should be such that there is it is analogous to qualitative dating. Now, in the larger Indian context, if I can generalize, we we are a civilization that believes in the concept of yoga, or yoga as the West calls it. And as a student of etymology, I can tell you that the word yoga actually means, one of the central meaning of it is actually to join. It is about the coming together of two energies to create a certain resonance and to create a certain greater meaning. And what is interesting is that this concept of yoga is central to everything that we do, and craft practices are no exceptions to this in the Indian context, at least. It's interesting that in Sanskrit as a language and Hindi to a certain extent, there is no word that connotes the idea of using something. So when you say use a pen, use a paper to do this, use a cloth to do this, there is no word in Sanskrit vocabulary which connotes this act of using anything. The closest word that you find to the idea of using in Sanskrit is called upyog. The Sanskrit word for experimentation is called prayog. Industry, loosely, the closest word that comes to the word industry in Sanskrit is called udyog. A good coincidence in our life, a happy coincidence, in Sanskrit it's called sanyog. So if you notice the sound of these words, each of them is actually suffixed by yog. Sanyog, upyog, prayog, udyog. Even the idea of giving companionship to someone is called sahyog. So actually these are all forms of yoga. The very act of being industrious is an act of yoga. The very act of experimentation should be an act of yoga, because the material that you are experimenting with, the medium that you are experimenting with, you and that medium should become one to be able to create something of a greater meaning. So I think this has been very, very central to the larger framework of Indian way of thinking, doing, feeling, and being. And the way we define something determines the quality of our engagement with us, isn't it? It goes without saying. If you are you my enemy or are you my friend? This definition will pave the way of the unfoldment of my relationship with you. So if that is the case, since we are so concerned about engaging with crafts, I think it becomes very, very pivotal for us to define crafts for us. And I would like to share not one, not two, but three different perspectives, three different ways of defining crafts, with the hope that it will expand our understanding and make us go beyond our conventional associations with craft. Because I think one thing that's common to a global perception about craft, if I can generalize, there are two facets. One, we believe that it has got something to do with hands, and two, it has got something to do with an act of making something. But if you delve a little deeper into etymology, not just of Indian languages, even in English, it seems to be something more than this. Because had it been something to do only with the hands, we won't have words like machine crafted in English. You have something called as handcrafted and you have something called as machine crafted. So the first definition actually finds an anchor not in the Indian context, but in the way the European society started looking at design and craft way back in 1919. So Bauhaus, which is said to be the seat of modern design in ways more than one, as early as 1919, they defined crafts as a social method of production. So they said that craft is not just a method of production, but craft is a social method of production. And I would like to expand this definition by saying that any method of production that dovetails with the ecological, cultural, political, and economic paradigm of a region can be qualified as craft. Thus, from that perspective, the machine oriented, mechanized production paradigm of America, which creates a very qualitative dovetailing with its capitalistic economic paradigm, wherein $1 million industry has been created around the festival of Christmas by creating products which are then commoditized as gifts. That seems to be much more crafty than the craft context that we are currently observing, in at least in the Indian context. This is not to say that the American system is better than the Indian system or vice versa, but I'm talking about this dovetailing that the method of production has, the economic paradigm of. But is craft just about production? So this second definition tries to expand our understanding beyond this contained perception about craft. But to delve into this second definition, let's first understand one basic principle that governs our existence across space and time. So there is a traditional model that talks of the interrelationship of three facets of our human existence. It talks of the interrelationship between our body, breath, and the mind state. So they say that for each body state, each physiological state, there is a corresponding breath pattern. And for each body pattern, body state, and a breath pattern, there is only a certain set of mind state that you can behold. I'll explain this better with an example. Say, for example, if you run very fast, what happens to your breath? You start breathing very rapidly, right? Your breath, you can't breathe the way I'm breathing right now. You'll be breathing like, that will be the rate of your breathing. However hard you try, in that body state, there is no other breath state that you can behold. And in such a body state and a breathing pattern, there is only a certain kind of thoughts that you can behold. Yeah, a very sort of rudimentary example will be that in such an exasperated state, it might be difficult for you to even behold thoughts of something as primal as a sexual mind. So what happens when you breathe very fast and you want to relax? So people ask you to breathe deeply. When you change the breathing pattern, your body state changes and thereby your mind state changes. So what is worth acknowledging here is that there is an interrelationship between these three. You change one and the other two are bound to change. You change your body state and your breath pattern and your mind state will change. That's why when people go for brisk walks of a rhythmic nature, they suddenly feel de-stressed. You change your breathing state and your mind state and the body state will change. That's why when you do breathing exercises, you feel exhilarated, you feel de-stressed, relaxed, etc. And you change your mind state. You stop thinking in a certain way and your breath and your body state will change. The reason why I'm sharing this is that there is a very, very deep connection between what you internalize and how you manifest, between what influences you and thereby what emerges from you as an expression. So the second definition talks of craft as an integral of the place, the people in that place, and the creations that emerge from those people. These creations are in turn comprising of three separate facets. These creations are a result of the material, the processes applied to those materials, and the resultant forms. However, while the place, the people, and their creation largely forms the making paradigm of crafts, the comprehension of craft and the engagement of craft is incomplete without having a cognizance of their consumers and the consuming paradigm. So, in the Indian traditional sense, actually an entire ecosystem was created to create a paradigm of effective consumption so that the expression and the creation that takes place by a group of people in a even given context finds an honoring. I can delve a little deeper into this if others have questions, but let me move to the third definition. But is craft just about creating and consuming? So this third definition goes a step beyond this. However, again, to understand this, we will have to understand yet another principle that governs not just our existence, but in fact, everything that exists in this universe is actually governed by the central principle. And the central principle actually talks of every entity in this universe, however subtle or gross, from a piece of what we call as an inanimate rock to something as subtle as our thoughts and our feelings. They say that everything at any given point in time is constantly doing two things. It's inputting energy and it's outputting energy. So, and the very fact that you exist is a function that you are inputting energy in an aggregation and taking place. And what you perceive of me as a form is what I am manifesting or outputting. And it is within this model that we also will be able to understand the hand connect with craft. So a conventional understanding says that whatever be the input, that will be the nature of the output. So you input a certain thought and a certain kind of action will come in. You input a certain food material and a certain kind of body will be formed. You input a certain chemical or a certain dye and a certain kind of color will emerge on the fabric. However, the traditional model, the traditional knowledge system talks of the cyclic relationship between these. The relationship is not linear but cyclic. So your input defines the nature of your output, and in turn, your output defines the nature of your input. This applies to everything from food to thoughts to our body forms to what we physically create also. So what is interesting is that in humans, there are these channels of inputting energy and there are channels of outputting energy. In the traditional realm, we call them Gyanindriya or Karmindriya. So what are these Gyanindriya or the channels of inputting? Conventionally, modern science talks of them as the five senses. So eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Yeah, actually those are the organs, but the sense of taste, the sense of touch, the sense of seeing, so on and so forth. So while you input energy through these, you express and you manifest through yet another five channels of outputting. So what are these five channels? Vak, Pani, Padam, Upasth, and Payu. The channel of speech. Vak, Pani, hands. Padam, feet. Upasth and Payu. Channels of procreation and channels of excretion. So मेरा ऐसा मानना है that in the Indian context, our entire craft paradigm, in fact, our larger way of being was heavily driven by creating a life that expresses itself very, very dominantly from the channel of hands and not so much from the channel of speech. You see, they say that for a balanced life, you should be able to output the same amount of energy from each of these channels. So the sages and the seers of this land, they actually understood that while the organs of procreation and organs of excretion, they are very difficult to harness and take control of. But if you create a regulated lifestyle, they stay in check. You don't end up expelling excessive amount of energies through these channels. So that leaves us with three other channels: no, organs of speech, organs of locomotion or feet, and these channels of doing and hands. So while feet have a very vital role to play, their larger role in life is movement in space, not so much in time. Thereby, it only leaves us with these two channels, which is the channel of speech and the channel of hands. So as I said, मेरा ऐसा मानना है that हमारा entire paradigm of living is anchored around using hands more and not so much the organ of speech. That's why you notice very, very evidently in almost all craft communities, at least the traditional craft communities, they don't speak much. In fact, even in the present times, I'm sure a lot of you would have experienced this. These days in the urban context, people end up enrolling for a lot of hobby classes where they get to make things with their hands. Making is becoming a rage in the coming times. And I'm sure it's a common experience for anyone who goes into such programs. After 2.5 days of just making with your hands, your urge and your want to speak reduces drastically. One of the reasons why we urbanites speak so much is because we don't use our hands so much. So the thing is that for a qualitative life, it is not just important to make things with hands. It is actually important to manifest with hands. And thereby, craft is not just a paradigm of making and consuming. It is not just a paradigm of production. It is actually a paradigm of manifestation. And in the absence of such a manifestational paradigm, human life finds a certain kind of imbalance. I can delve deeper into this if there are questions. Let me just share few other sort of models, and then I'll be open to sort of them being critiqued and questioned. So with this as a larger framework, I think in my practice, I discovered that there were, because as an outsider, as a designer or as a social entrepreneur or as an economist, when we engage with craft context, actually our engagement can be categorized with three different attitudes. And these attitudes are these three approaches with which we engage with craft. I'll explain this with an example. So say, for instance, there is this very, very evocative craft form in India from a part in Telangana and Andhra, where the craft persons are shadow puppeteers. So this particular art form is called Tholu Bomalata, where in fact it is known to be they produce the largest shadow puppets in the world. You know, the puppets are as large as these, 8 to 10 feet tall. And what makes them very, very distinct is that you see shadows, but these shadows are actually colored. And they create this magic by using leather and hand painting it and creating a beautiful canvas of not just colors, but with a rich vocabulary of punctures and perforations made in the leather. And the result is this magnificent sort of play of light that you see against a flat screen. So the first approach that a lot of designers take is what I call as Utpadan Ka Sadhan, or means of production. So in this approach, what we do as a designer is that we cling on to one of the many things that the craft context and the paradigm is capable of. And then we conceive with our imagination what is it that should be made. We lock the parameters of what should be done and what should not be done. And thereby the craft person and the craft community is asked to produce against those parameters. Yeah, so you will have results in the form of objects like lamps. You will have things like fairy lights. You will have things like bags. You will have things like little danglers. So what is interesting in this approach is to understand its potentiality and its challenges. Because these shadow puppeteers, they are not just makers of these objects here. In fact, they are not the makers of these objects at all. They are actually not even the makers of the shadow puppeteers. These pictorial narrative traditions of India and the beholders of it, often in our traditional vocabulary, they are claimed to be the param karigars or the absolute craft persons, because they are not just creators of objects, they are not just knowers of the science and the chemistry behind chemicals and colors and creators of objects. They are also script writers, they are storytellers, they are performers, and they are also musicians, singers, dancers, and they are also social reformists, because their curation of the stories is is a response to the social need, and thereby by the narration of those stories they are trying to reinforce certain thoughts and beliefs in the society, and they are also influencing and empowering the society to keep a mind in a certain space. So from this larger pool of possibility, we use only a small fragment of what they can do, and then we lock everything that they should do without them having an autonomy or a say in it, and then we ask them to produce. So in an approach like this, tomorrow if there is a system available where you can produce the same object without a human having to hand paint it, without you having to engage with a human and thereby burden yourself with the challenges of human engagement and confrontation, and if it costs the same or less, and if you get the same amount of quality, we will not even bat an eyelid once and we will migrate to that entire system. It happened to many things over the last 2 decades across the globe. To give you an example, there's something called as a jigsaw, in which people used to profile wood on a flat surface by manually sort of maneuvering it and creating various kinds of ornate forms. When laser cutting came into being, which was cheaper, which was more precise, and even the aesthetics that you got was of a certain higher quality from a certain viewpoint, over a period of 7 to 8 years, the entire fraternity of jigsaw workers completely vanished. The same happened with photography. When digital photography came into being, the film developers and people who could do manual developing and printing, over a decade, they completely vanished. So the redundancy of this approach is that it uses a very small fragment of the larger potency that an individual and a community beholds. But there is also a silver lining to this, especially in the Indian context. Agar ye bhi nahi hoga, then it is the same group of people that you find sweeping somebody's house in an urban context and doing jobs that are actually not autonomously selected and volunteered for in an urban context. So a lot of designers are actually working with this approach. I think if we are cognizant of its potentiality and redundancy, we can choose whether we want to place ourselves with this approach. Second approach seems to be slightly more cognizant of the multiple dimensions that this craft and this community brings. And I call it Srijan ka Sahyogi, or the creative collaborator approach. So in this approach, what we will do as designers is, say for example, because we understand the market within which we are wanting to place this craft, which is the urban market in this case. So we will create a form that that resonates and evokes a possibility of desirability in this market. So if you look at this little snake-like form, this is actually a very, very evocative lamp. And this has been produced by a very, very contemporary geometric tessellation of a certain basic shape. And it creates a very, very evocative form. However, when this piece is produced in this goat leather, it is just a white lump and nothing else. So what the designer did was that the designer just presented this little, this large object as a canvas to these evolved artists from Thulu Bomalata to paint on them. The designer established some broad outlines and parameters, but they were free to interpret. And the result is this evocative display of motifs and perforations and patterns, which is creating the exclusive value that this lamp is evoking. So this, to me, seems to be a slightly better approach than the first one, because here there is a greater sense of autonomous expression by the artist. But there is also a redundancy in this approach. And that redundancy is this, that even now in this approach, the artisan and the community is still dependent on an outsider to establish the parameters of creation. Because the command that an urbane mindset has on urban market is very different from the command that they have on the urban market. Thereby, some parameters will have to come from them. And till the time this third party remains in the picture, this marriage is of a certain value. Otherwise, it creates a deficit. The other flip side of this approach is that, like what Anas was pointing out, actually, if you look at the final value that emerges from this object in the market, the major share of that value is coming from the craft community and their craft vocabulary. However, that share is not just, because even in this approach, रहते तो ये दिहाड़ी के मजदूरी हैं. In the first approach, they were being paid a daily wage of 300 to 400 rupees. In the second approach, they might be paid 1000 to 1500 rupees. But at the end of the day, they remain like a daily wager. So can there be another approach? Can we go beyond these two realms, which only use a small dimension of their being? And it is in this third approach that personally I find great inspiration and great news. And I think that a lot of us can take a cue from this. And I call it the paradigm creation approach, or Sandarbh ka nirmata hona. So you see, what I will do, instead of getting people who were storytellers who used an object like a shadow puppeteer to narrate their stories, instead of asking them to make little objects of context that is not theirs, so from a pencil box to lamp, instead of doing that, I will create, let's say, a mobile truck for them. Because I know that they are itinerant, they move from place to place. They are storytellers who like moving from one context and one group of audience to another. I will create a vehicle of mobility for them, which is also a mobile theater. I will design a system by which this truck can anchor itself in a place and open up to become a very evocative stage. And then I will collaborate with them over an elongated period of time to develop newer stories. I understand that newness is something that it's the need of the times. But I will develop newer stories which do not appeal to me, but which emerge from their sensibilities and their experience. These are storytellers who narrate stories only from two larger fables. They narrate stories from Ramayana and Mahabharata. I will not ask them to narrate the story of Iron Man and Titanic. If these stories can become theirs, then they have all the right to narrate these stories. And if I think that these stories are important, then it's important for these stories to become theirs. And thereby, I must devise paradigms by which they can take ownership of these stories. Yeah, these are some very interesting examples of a similar sort of approach. These are some wooden toys made in a city called Banaras or Varanasi in northern India. And these are traditional toy makers who carve wood to create forms like these. Very, very evocative and beautiful forms. And what to an outsider appears to be a very, very intensive ornamentation, you will see that these are hand painted, very, very intricate and detailed. Actually, it's an integral part of almost all craft practices. In fact, one of the central principles governing Indian aesthetics is that we don't believe in straight lines and we don't believe in flat surfaces. And there is a reason behind this. There is a science behind this. There is a philosophy behind this. सीधी line बनती है तो वो काटती है बस. It's as simple as that. That's why you will notice in all Indian art expressions, and I include all craft as a part of this art paradigm, we do not have a concept of a straight line. Wherever there is a need for a straight line, like a column in a building, you can't do away with the straightness of the line, otherwise the structure won't stand. So they will create a straight line and then they will break it in multiple ways, because there doesn't exist wherever there is straight line in nature, it creates stark distinction. And we want to obliterate these stark. So is the case with flat surfaces. So you will never find in the Indian traditional context people wearing clothing which are flat in color. It'll be peppered with breaking the monotony of the surface, because wherever there is flatness, it is symbolic of barrenness. Deserts are like that, and in fact, in nature, even a desert is not monotonous either, because when you observe it closely, just by the flow of the wind, it becomes non-monotonous. So what is interesting is in Banaras they create toys like these. Now the same group of people with the second approach or the first approach where you look at them as means of production, designers like us go and ask them to make toys for Christmas tree decoration or for Christmas celebration. So Christmas is not a festival that they relate with. Yeah, so this is a little toy that represents a little shepherd in the larger beautiful story of Jesus' birth. But if you notice the stark difference between the renditions of these two surfaces, there is flatness in this because suddenly the maker has lost all the autonomy to express himself or herself in this. However, what is interesting is Jesus has been a part of our stories and fables for the last 2 centuries or so. So when you give that person the right to create a Jesus form, this is what they create. So the Jesus is almost as elaborate and as ornated as the other form is. I mean, at least as much as it can be to being honest to the character that we understand of it. So the idea is that the stories have to become theirs. And then a paradigm has to be created so that they can express themselves with complete autonomy. So my urge to all of you is to find your point of entry into this realm. There is nothing wrong in the first approach either. But let's understand that if we are aspiring for the third approach, then we have to take conscious actions to move toward. So I think Avi, I've spoken a lot. Let others react, and then I can sort of respond to it a little more.
Thank you, Sachin. I think this was so interesting, and we really sort of lost count of time. And Angela, I think we can open the forum for questions and interactions.